Welcome to Train Signal, and you're watching how to build your own little TV station, how to set up Windows Media Server for easy broadcasting over your network, and at the end, we're going to do a little experiment that's going to give you a bit of a primer on clustering servers together. It'll be fun, but it will definitely be an experiment. So let's go ahead and talk about what's going to be in this video. We're going to talk about, first of all, Hank's new idea. Yeah, Hank is out there running around seeing what other people are doing and saying, hey, let's have our own little station called Globo TV. And so we'll talk about what he discovered. We're going to talk about how to get Media Server installed. And by the way, it's not the typical installation. It is a downloadable role. We'll have to go out and get it. Then we're going to talk about how to get your stuff streaming. We're going to talk about publishing points and wrappers and all that good stuff. Then we're going to talk a little bit about clustering. I want to throw this in here because I want to get you a bit of a primer on it. We're going to try to cluster two media servers together. We'll see how we do. It might work, it might not, but we're going to go ahead and give it the old college try anyway. So let's go ahead and talk about Hank's new idea as we start off, all right? So this is what happens when Hank visits other companies. He recently took a trip to a buddy's company. While he was there, he witnessed employees viewing training and video updates from the CEO while just sitting around at their desks. He asked his buddy how that worked, and he says, I don't know, I'm an IT guy. Used Server 2008 something and created it, but he really didn't know how it worked. All this guy knew is that he talked in front of a camera and it showed up on people's desktops. So of course, now that Hank has seen this, Hank wants you to create Globo TV, where employees can also get updates and training while sitting at their desktops. So after asking Hank's secretary to stop putting visits to other companies on his schedule, you look up Windows Media Server and you find out that yes, it can be done. We can set up Server 2008 for video and audio streaming. So that's good news, I think. But you know, every time Hank goes out, it seems like he comes back with some other great, fantastic idea. So let's go ahead and let's talk about getting Media Server installed. The good news is that Media Server is actually pretty easy, but it is a downloadable role from Microsoft, so we are going to have to go out and get it. So when you go to your role services, it's not going to be there, okay? Just so you know right up front. Now there's 3 downloads that you're going to need to grab and install here. Then after you've installed the 3 updates, then you can install the role using Server Manager like we normally would, okay? Now, along the way, IIS is also going to be installed because we actually do use IIS as a component for this whole streaming media thing. So you need to be aware of that. Just wanted to throw that in so you're not surprised when you go to install media services and hey, all of a sudden here's IIS just kind of popping up out of nowhere. Well, it's not out of nowhere. It's actually installed on purpose. One thing that isn't installed, though, is the IIS Management Console, so we're probably going to have to go back in and install that because once you get used to using the IIS Management Console and all of a sudden it's not there, well, you might be a little concerned. So I want to show you how to get that done as well. So let's go ahead and let's get this process installed. Now, here's what I've done. I've actually set up a Server 2008 machine like I've set up all the others. This is one of the ones that we installed at the very beginning. This is Media 1 we're going to be going over to. And I haven't done anything with it except for join it to the domain, set the IP address and the time zone and stuff like that, okay? So let's bounce on over to the server and let's get this started. Alright, so we're over here on the Hyper-V machine and let's go on into Media 1 on the local host just to show you what I've done, just so you know that I haven't pulled any sleight of hand tricks or anything. I've set the time zone to Eastern for New York. I specified a manual IP address here, or static IP address, 192.168.5.18. And I've named the machine Media 1, and I've joined it to the domain Globomantics. All right, so no big surprises here. There are no roles, no features, and actually remote desktop is actually disabled right now. If we want to manage only this one Hyper-V machine, we'll probably want to turn that on eventually, but not right now. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Close. And now I'm going to go here to Windows Media Services, and I've actually did a search. I just went to Microsoft.com, by the way, and I did a search for Windows Media Services. And you'll see here that there is an actual URL for it, Microsoft.com/Windows/Windows Media for Pros/serve/prodinfo2008.aspx. just in case you really have time to type all that in instead of just doing a search for Windows Media Services. All right, so over here we have the Download Now section. So let's go ahead and let's click on Download Windows Media Services 2008. And oh, good. Looks like server security is still turned on. Okay, we're just going to close that. Okay. All right, so scrolling down here, and let's scroll down and let's get to these files here. And we're scrolling. Okay, there we go. All right, so we have two versions. There are 3 files that we need to grab. Now, here are the 3 files that we need. Oops, here, let's not do that. Here are the 3 files that we need due to the fact that we have a 64-bit server. Now, if you're running the 32-bit edition and you're going to run Windows Media Server, you need to grab these bottom 3, okay, the x86 versions. But we're going to go ahead and just download these guys real quick. And okay, yes, we'll add that. Close. All right, so we started that download. Let's go ahead and start the next download. We'll save that guy, and just get these guys downloaded here pretty fast. Save him. And I'm storing all of these in the download section here. Let's see, we got all 3 of them. Now let's go and let's find out. I'm going to go into the SuperCoach folder here. And to the downloads, let's see what we got. Looks like we got one finished up. All right, we'll close it. I'm not sure if I got one of them. I think I might be missing one of them. Let's go back over here. I think I might have missed one of them. Okay, looks like we got that guy. Let's go back and let's check here. Let's see what we actually do have. I'll just expand this guy here a little bit so we can see what's going on. All right, so we got the core, we have the server, but we're missing the admin. Okay, let's go ahead and make sure we get the admin here as well. And you see that, I want a pretty fast connection, so these guys download pretty quickly. Okay, so now that we have all 3 files, the admin, the core, and the server, I'm going to go ahead and close out of Windows Media Service here, and let's go ahead and let's just get these guys installed. Does it really matter which one you start with? Not that I can tell. So we just go ahead and we'll just get these guys installed here real quick. Doesn't take long, doesn't take much to install them, although you will have to accept license agreements and all that good stuff. See here that the initial installation is pretty fast. You know how to install software, so I'm going to pause the video for just a second while I get these 3 updates installed. And as soon as they're done installing, I'll be right back and I'll show you the actual roll installation process. Alright, so the installation has completed. Let's go ahead and close this box. And now let's go to the roll section. And we're going to click on Add Rolls. And we're going to go ahead and go to Next. And now Streaming Media Services is now available. Alright, nifty. Let's go ahead and tell it Next. And Next. And now we get to decide what kind of stuff are we going to allow, as well as the Windows Media Server. Now we do have a web-based administration component too that we can access if we want to have an easy way to manage this guy remotely. Let's go ahead and put a check mark in there. And we also have the ability to do logging, so we can just kind of watch what's happening with that. We'll go ahead and we'll install it for right now. You don't necessarily have to install it if you're not that worried about it, especially if it's a small network. But if you want to do some troubleshooting and whatnot, it's a good thing to have in place. So we'll go ahead and we'll tell it Next. Next, here's what we want to do. We need to select how we're going to be transferring or streaming the video. We can either use Real-Time Streaming Protocol, RTSP. Now, it delivers unicast streams to computers running Windows Media Player 9 series or later. Now, this is going to be the most optimum, just so you know. We can also have Hypertext Transfer Protocol that delivers the streams to computers running any version of Windows Media Player or Windows Media Services. Now, I'm going to suggest that you use RTSP if it's at all possible. You're going to have better results, and your users are going to have a better experience. HTTP will do the job, but it's really a lesser delivery methodology. Now we can go ahead and we can install it here. It won't hurt anything for it to be there and enabled, but you may or may not necessarily want to use it as you work more with it. We'll tell it Next, and now it's going to tell us what's going to be installed here. We're going to go ahead and tell it to install, and basically just sit back and wait for it to be done. So I'm going to go ahead now and pause the video while this guy installs, and as soon as it's done, I'll be right back. We'll move on to the next step. Okay, so Media Server role has been installed, and you'll see here that it now looks like streaming media services here in the Server Manager. And hey, looky here, here's that web server that I was telling you about. IIS showed up. Now, when you click on it, you'll notice here that there's no pluses or anything. If I go to the Start menu, there's no administrative tools or anything like that for it. And I don't like that. I really like to have IIS Manager Console on whatever machine I may have it installed on. So I'm going to go here and go ahead and add the role service real quick. It won't take very long at all. I'm just going to install the management tools for IIS just so I have them available. You notice here that it's going to check to see if features required for it are installed, and looks like that we need some configuration and Windows Process Activation Services stuff happening. Let's go ahead and add required features there. We'll go ahead and we'll install the management scripts and the management service, and we do need the .NET environment for that. We'll go ahead and add the required features and tell it next. We'll go ahead and we'll install this guy. It's going to sit here and spin for just a little bit. And yes, once again, I am going to pause the video for a short time while this guy finishes installation, and then I'll be right back. Alright, so we got those guys installed here real quick. Let's just go ahead and close out of that. We shouldn't need to have a reboot, although we probably will need to do an F5 here real quick in order to get to see that management console. We don't really need to have it in order for streaming media services to work, but it is one of those niceties that you'll come to appreciate as you get more and more into using IIS and streaming services along the way. Alright, so let's go ahead and let's go into Windows Media Services here real quick. And you'll see here that our Media One GlobalMantic server is up and active. If you want to expand that, you'll see let me go ahead and expand this over here a little bit so we can see everything over in the console tree. Here is some troubleshooting. I think it's kind of interesting that troubleshooting is right up top. Does that tell us something? Well, I don't know. But anyway, we're not really using caches or proxies at this point. That's really for a whole different lesson, for a whole different day. All right, so we have some publishing points. All right, now what a publishing point is really a defined location for media services so that you can stream stuff. All right. Now, we're going to talk about these here, but I just wanted to mention these two as they are. We have a default on-demand publishing point and a sample broadcast. These are installed when you install media services. They just come right along with the package. You can trash them or you can play with them as you like. But now that we have services installed, let's go ahead and let's go back on over to the slides, because I want to talk to you a little more about publishing points and what you're going to need in order to actually stream video and have your own little television station. Alright, so let's talk about how to get your stuff streaming now that we have media services installed. Here's the thing. Once it's installed, we can now create what we call publishing points. Now again, a publishing point is just a defined location on the server, and it can hold things like single files. You can also do playlists. So let's say you have multiple clips that you want to play in succession. We can hold web pages that hold the videos or audio, and we can also do live broadcasts. So streaming media services has actually quite a robust set of features that you can play with depending upon what you need for your particular little TV station. Now, the nifty thing about this, and this is something that I really think is cool, everything is wizardized. I mean, there's a wizard for everything. You don't need a huge amount of specialized knowledge just to get this thing up and running. What you really do need, though, is you do need a media file that is in WMV format, or you need a live broadcast. Now, I'm telling you that WMV, for a specific reason, you're probably going to get the best results because, well, it's Windows, and Microsoft's format, in WMV is very specifically designed to work with streaming. So there's a lot of buttons, as you see over here in the screen capture I have on the screen right over here. There's a lot of links to a lot of help. So you can explore this more freely on your own. I'm just going to show you basically how to create a publishing point for a single file, and let's do a real quick test to make sure that our media server actually does work. Now, I could probably do about a 4 to 6 hour class just on media server. There's a lot of really fun things in it, but this is primarily to get a foundation underneath you so you can move forward on your own. So publishing points, here's the thing. They can be accessed via Internet Explorer, but instead of typing HTTP Since we're primarily going to use that real-time streaming protocol, RTSP, we're probably going to be accessing it using Internet Explorer, using MMS:/ as the protocol instead. That's actually going to open up whatever video or media that you want to post and publish into Media Player. All right. The end result is that your users will be viewing whatever content you post on this streaming media server inside of Windows Media Player. Now, the nifty thing about streaming is that it's not actually saved to the hard drive. It only gets streamed into RAM. It's played from RAM. So the content will not actually be stored on the user's hard drive. An important element to remember. I also want to take just a second here. We're actually going to see this section in the demonstration coming up next. But in addition to having a publishing point, you will also need what we call a wrapper for the media. Now remember that everything is wizardized, okay? You may not know anything about media services at all, but because of the wizards, just about anybody can make this thing work. And I'm not kidding, just about anybody. So let's go ahead and let's bounce back on over to our server now, and let's go ahead and let's set up a basic publishing point. We'll only publish a single file. Now, by the way, there are some videos that are going to be readily available to us after we install Windows Media Server that we'll use to practice with. So let's go ahead and let's bounce on over to that and let's get this started. Alright, so back over here on Media 1, and here's our publishing points, and we could play around with these if we want, but I'm more interested in showing you how to create your own publishing point. Now, we do have a wizard mode and an advanced mode. I'm going to walk you through the wizard just so you can see the steps and see how easy it really is to create these publishing points. So we're going to add a publishing point here, starting the wizard, and we're going to go ahead and tell it next. Next, what we need to do is we need to give our publishing point a name, and let's just call this prac for practice. And remember to avoid these particular characters as it says down here in the tip. Alright, so we're going to name that guy practice. Now here is where we're going to select what's actually going to be held on that particular location. Now, one thing that I want you to kind of think about as we're working with media services, think of it a little more like a web server, okay? Because remember, we are using IIS in the mix. So when we talk about publishing points, think about publishing points more as a website that only streams media, if you will. All right, if that makes a little more sense to you. So rather than having HTML files and all that jazz, what we're really going to have is just simply media files for folks to stream. All right, so let's do a one file content type publishing point so we can actually see if this thing will work. Now, I told you earlier that you can create playlists and you can also do files here in a directory. Now you can also notice here you can also stream other content types by using the advanced add publishing point dialog box. Now in order to get this thing up and running, you don't need to know a lot about this. However, if you're going to be a media specialist per se, those are going to be things that you're going to want to play around with. In terms of the 643 exam, however, I really just want to get you this foundational knowledge so that you know how to set it up and also be able to answer any questions that may come up about this on the exam. All right, we're going to tell it next. All right, what playback scenario do you want to create? Broadcast publishing. This is really more for a live playback session. This is not what we're going to be doing. Let me click on back here. You'll notice here that we have the encoder if you're going to be doing a live broadcast via some kind of webcam or video camera and whatnot. Obviously, we're only going to be doing one file for an on-demand publishing point, so we're going to basically allow our users to view this practice publishing point file anytime that they want. We'll go ahead and tell it next. Do we want to add a new on-demand publishing point or use an existing one? Well, we're going to go ahead and just add a new publishing point because we already have some in there, but I don't like them. Purely personal preference with this. Let's go ahead and we'll tell it next. All right, so where is the file now? Where does it live? Let's click on the Browse button here. Now you notice here that it's dropping us to C, and you'll notice here that we also have a whole bunch of files that are just kind of hanging out here that we can utilize. I'm going to grab this pinball.wmv. Now you notice here that we also have JPEGs in here that we could play with if we so desired. Not really interested in that, but the pinball one is kind of fun. So we could select files from pretty much anywhere that we can get to them quickly and easily. Let's go ahead and click on Select File, and now we'll tell it Next. Do we want to log data about clients receiving content as a unicast stream? Well, we could. We can go ahead and enable it, and it's not going to hurt anything. It does take up a little more overhead, so when you're working with streaming media, you may or may not want to enable logging for a particular publishing point. If your server doesn't have a huge amount of RAM, maybe it's an older box you're installing this on, it might be something you might want to take into consideration because it may decrease performance slightly. And depending upon what kind of experience you want your users to have, this may or may not be a good idea. For right now, since we're only going to be testing this, we'll go ahead and we'll enable it. We'll tell it Next. All right, so here is our options for the publishing point. Okay, that looks good. We'll tell it Next. And now it's actually going to complete the wizard. After the wizard finishes, here is a very important item. We're going to be creating what we call a wrapper file. Okay. Now this wrapper file is what is going to actually direct our media player to stream the particular file that we're publishing. That's really all a wrapper file is. You don't need to have a massive amount of knowledge about it because it is wizardized, but we're going to be creating an announcement file, all right, or a web page if we so desire. We can also create a wrapper playlist, and this wrapper playlist is really for Windows Media Player so that it knows what to play, what is available. And we can do basically all of them. Now we're just doing an announcement file, this very simplistic wrapper, because we're only publishing one file. Let's click on Finish. And now the unicast announcement wizard is going to pop up here. All right, neat. We'll tell it Next. Access to the content. Here is our URL, by the way. We saw this just a little bit earlier. But the URL we're going to direct our client to go to inside of Internet Explorer is mms://media1.globomantics.com. Notice the fully qualified domain name there, /prac. Okay, that is the name of the publishing point where we have that pinball file available to stream. Now notice down here it tells us that the MMS prefix enables Windows Media Player to negotiate the optimal protocol for the connection automatically. Again, we know that we can use HTTP if we so desired, but that's maybe not going to be the best solution, as our users are going to have a slightly degraded experience with HTTP versus MMS. We're going to tell it Next. Where is the announcement file? You notice here that it's specified where it's going to live automatically. Where does it live? inetpub. Hey, we've seen this before, haven't we? www.root/prac.asx. So this is actually living in the public folder for our IIS installation, isn't it? Now we could also create a web page with an embedded player and a link to the content if we so desired. This is what we would actually use if we're going to be doing HTTP. Again, is that going to be the best option? If you're going to be creating stuff for folks to view outside of your network to the outside world, this may actually be the best bet. But since Hank's vision for Globo TV is primarily just for the inside of the network, for people who are on the premises, we're going to be using the ASX format. We're not going to be creating a web page. Now, we can also copy the syntax for embedding a player in a web page to the clipboard. So if we are doing some custom web development and we want to integrate our media services stuff in with a custom website, we could also grab the syntax and all of the related code and paste it into a web page if we needed to do some custom work. We're not going to do that because this is not a development class. We're going to tell it Next. Here's our metadata. Now, if you have an iPod or a Zune, you're probably familiar with this, but this is the information that is actually read by Windows Media Player. We're just going to call it Practice Pinball, and the author, I'm going to put in here me, even though I really didn't create it, but any copyright information, banner and log URL, we're going to skip those and tell it Next. All right, now it's going to try to test files when this wizard finishes. Let's go ahead and click on Finish. Let's go ahead and let's click on Test Announcement. Now, Windows Media Player may not necessarily be installed on a Windows Server 2008 box by default, so we're going to go ahead and exit out. what we're going to do next is we're going to move over to the Vista machine that we've been playing with on and off throughout the course. We're actually going to go to mms://media1.globalmantics.com/prac. Here this guy is right here, and see if it will actually stream the video. And I know the Vista machine has Windows Media Player installed, so I'm going to go ahead and open up Internet Explorer here, and I'll just go ahead and we'll type in mms://media1.globalmantics.com/prac. Get my mouse out of the way there. And let's see if Windows Media Player opens up like it should. Well, would you look at that? We are now streaming this video over to the Vista client. So our media server does in fact work. Our test was successful, so it's now ready to take any content that Hank wants to put up onto the server and stream it out to our users. So it's good news. We can now go back to Hank and say, hey, you know what? Your mini TV station is ready. We can always go back to our Media 1 server, and we could create as many publishing points as you want. Eventually, you're going to probably want to delete and remove some of these other points, you know, that are just kind of hanging out, and work with your own publishing points. So that's Media Server. It's really easy to implement. As you saw, it's all wizardized. So even if you have zero experience with streaming video, as long as you have the video clips in WMV format, you're able to get those guys out and about. Tell you what, I want to take just a quick look into the advanced publishing wizard here. And it's, you know, not that different, except that it does give us a few more options down here in the content type examples. We can also deliver a stream from a remote publishing point on a remote server. We can also utilize ASP scripts if you have a lot of development going on and a full-time developer or a contract developer, whoever. Playlist, directory, encoders, multicast streams. So we have a few more options in the advanced section than what we do with the wizard. So just wanted to show this to you real quick. You just name the publishing point, put in the location, and then select the type. So it's kind of funny that this is the advanced box. There you do have a few more options in there. Okay, so I've shown you how to set this guy up. It's working perfectly. Let's go back now to the slides, and let's start talking about an experiment in failover clustering for our Windows Media Server. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about clustering here. It's really kind of a weird word for fault tolerance. What it is, it's a feature of Server 2008, and it allows multiple servers to really do the same job. Primarily, if one server dies, the other server or servers in the cluster will take over the tasks. Now, we've talked about clustering before a little bit, but I want to go into a little more detail here with you. It uses what we call a quorum disk, and you might have heard it called a witness disk, by the way. And what it does, it holds replication files and other information, and it really determines how many failures can occur before really the cluster goes kaboom and doesn't exist anymore, and that particular service dies. So what you really want to have in a cluster is you want to have at least two servers. So you have one server does the job, and in case that server dies, the other server will take over. Now it's going to depend upon how you configure the quorum disk. We'll get into that when we get into the demonstration, by the way. But the quorum disk really is key to clustering to work. Now, I need to let you know here that clustering was really designed for storage area networks, but you can use clustering for other services. But I'm putting here, you know, the with caution, because not everything is necessarily going to work with clustering. And I want you to really wrap your head around that. It's really not a one-size-fits-all kind of solution, and I'll talk to you about a solution about that here in just a few seconds. But clustering has very specific hardware requirements. You need to have SCSI disks or an iSCSI fiber channel, something that's a little more higher level than just a standard IDE or SATA set of drives in there. So if you're going to be doing clustering, you really need to be very careful about selecting your hardware. And it's so important that Microsoft has actually opened up a whole new little section specifically for the development of hardware that plays nice with the failover clustering sandbox. I mean, hardware is really the key to having clustering work. Now, I'm going to show you in the demonstration, our little experiment coming up, how easy clustering really is, because it really is wizard based. It's very simple to do as long as your hardware requirements are there. This is not something you're just going to do willy-nilly. Right? This is something you're going to have planned out. You're going to shop around for different hardware vendors and see what they have that actually does support clustering in Server 2008. Now, one big note here, as I mentioned before, clustering, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's really great to use with Exchange Server for email, SQL Server, and for file servers. Now, in order to use it with Exchange and SQL Server, there's actually very specific instructions with those applications that will help you to configure clustering for those very specific applications. And as you know, email is a critical element to every business, not just some, it's every business nowadays. And so having a highly available solution for your Exchange server is a pretty critical thing. Now, obviously, that's way outside of the scope of the course of what we're doing right now, but I did want to let you know that Exchange and SQL Server are two very, very common uses for clustering. File servers are also another very common use. Remember, I was telling you that it is designed primarily for storage area networks, at least at the outset, but we figured out that we can use it for other stuff, as I'll show you. Now, other services, you're going to find out they may or may not play well with clustering, right? So if you find yourself getting really frustrated trying to cluster a very specific role or service, what you might want to do instead of doing a cluster is do network load balancing, which I showed you with terminal services. And actually, I showed you the terminal services implementation, but the regular network load balancing isn't any more difficult, just so you know. So NLB might be a better choice for a very specific service, especially for web servers, and quite frankly, probably for media services as well. But you know what? I think that what we're going to do here, I want to do a little media services clustering experiment. Now, I'm going to warn you ahead of time that our little experiment may or may not work due to the fact that I do not have the hardware requirements on these machines in order for it to be fully functional, all right? My hardware is all SATA IDE type of work. I don't have any actual SCSI machines here. So this is going to be a little bit of an experiment in the interest of science. Now, normally what you would do is you would cluster two physical machines together, or you would cluster two Hyper-V machines on two separate Hyper-V servers. Now, right now at Global Magnetics, we're kind of hardware poor. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to cluster two Hyper-V machines on the same physical server. Again, this is really more in the interest of science. I want you to actually see clustering and all the steps that go into it. I want you to be able to have some familiarity with the quorum configurations, and the easiest way to do that is to go through the steps. Now, we'll actually be able to create a cluster, and it might work and it might blow up in your face, but I want you to be familiar at the very least with the process. Okay? So here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to grab an image of our media services machine, and we're going to create a duplicate virtual machine. Now, you've already seen me do this, so this is also a good time to review how to get that done. And then we're going to install failover clustering on both of our machines. Then we're going to attempt to create a cluster. And the question is, will it work? Will it crash and burn? Well, let's find out and let's see what we get. No guarantees on this one, though, due to the fact that I do not have the hardware requirements. But doesn't mean that we can't give it the old college try. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's move over to our Hyper-V machine, and let's get our whole process started, okay? All right, so here I am over on the Hyper-V machine right now, and here is my media server in Hyper-V. First of all, what we're going to do is we're going to make a snapshot, because as you remember from our previous demonstrations, when we're going to be creating a duplicate machine, we need to run sysprep on the machine that we're going to be duplicating. Now, when we run sysprep, it does muck things up, and so we're doing work in Hyper-V, we can take a snapshot so we can go back to that state of the machine and not have to really redeploy the server. All right, so now that my snapshot is created, let's go over here to Media 1. Media server is installed on it, and the PRAC publishing point is intact because, well, we just built it, right? Okay, let's go ahead and let's go to the Start menu. We're going to type sysprep into the search box, and we're going to run our little sysprep guy here just as another quick review of this. And we are going to be using the out-of-box experience. We're going to generalize. By the way, this generalize section is the element that actually strips out the unique identifiers in the process. So this is a very important step for us to create a duplicate machine. It's going to have a new name, it's going to have a new security identifier, all that good stuff. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to tell it OK. And it's going to sit here and spin for just a little bit while it strips out all of the very specific information for this machine. All right, so we're shutting down here, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going back into our network boot here, because we want to use that Grab-it image that we created way back, and we want to grab a copy of what is on this hard drive as an image. There we go. Let's go down to Grab-it. And I can't reiterate enough that you need to run sysprep before you try to utilize your capture image. If you don't run sysprep first, you will not be able to capture the drive, and you will be sad. I know I said that last time around, but I'm saying it again because it's a critical step. And you know what? There's been more than once where I've forgotten to run sysprep and just thought, well, I'll just go ahead and grab that image with the capture, and then got into the wizard and figured out that, oh, gee, I can't select the volume that I want to grab, and that's not so great. And there we go. That's what we wanted to see. And now we should be booting into the... There we go, Windows Deployment Services Image Capture Wizard. Now remember that since we're in remote desktop again, we do not have integrated services running, so I'm going to have to use the keyboard for all of this. Pressing the Enter key to go to the next, and now volume to capture using the down arrow key to select C. And my image name, this is going to be Media Services. We'll just call it EXP, so we know that this is an experiment in case we want to get rid of it later. And we'll just put in a quick description. Duplicating our media services box for experiment, so we know where it is. Okay. All right, using the tab key to go down to next, and then pressing the enter key. Now we need to browse for the location, and I'm just going to be placing this on the C drive for easy access. And also, by the way, when you create our image, we need to go back, and if we don't have the snapshot to very easily go back to our previous state of the hard drive and of the computer itself, if you're using this on a physical machine, you want to go back and delete the image, because when we grab the image initially, that image then goes and lives on the WDS server, our Windows Deployment Server. And so we don't want it just lying around on your C disk taking up a whole lot of space, right? Okay, so now I'm on the C drive, moving down to the file name here, and we're going to call this Media Serve Image. We'll save that guy. Now I'm going to use the tab key to move down to upload image to WDS server, put a check mark in it. Server name was deploy 1-globo. Now let's see if we can connect to it. Pressing the enter key, and there we go. It's going to ask for credentials. So let's go ahead and put in Globomantics/Supercoach, which is what I've been using all the time, all the way throughout here as my administrative credentials. Filling it OK. And now, image group name. This is a 64-bit server, so we're going to be putting it in server 2008 64 bits. And we'll hit finish. And now we sit back and let him go. So, of course, I'm going to be pausing the video and letting this thing do its capture wizard thing. And then as soon as it's done, we'll come back. We will use the snapshot of application. We'll revert this machine back previous before we did the sysprep on this machine, and then we'll turn around and we'll use the image we're creating now to duplicate our media services machine in a brand new virtual machine that we'll create. I'll show that to you for review to make sure that's solid in your head, okay? Alright, the capture has completed successfully, so let's go ahead and close this guy out. Whoops, let's make sure we use the keyboard, not the mouse here. Yes, I know, mouse cannot capture in remote desktop session, blah, blah, blah. And we'll get this guy rebooted. Of course, at this stage in the game, really what we really should do, rather than do that, is actually restore back to Media 1's original state. So let's go back over here to our server manager on our Hyper-V machine, and let's get this Media 1 back to where he needs to be, because it doesn't make us any real, doesn't give us any advantage to really redeploy per se. Let's go ahead and apply this snapshot. It should take just a few minutes. Take snapshot and then apply, or just apply. Now we're just going to just apply it, because we really don't need a snapshot of the machine after it's been captured by Windows Deployment Services. All right, so while that guy is restoring, let's go ahead and let's create a brand new virtual machine again. And there's very little difference of what we're going to do in terms of like the actual machine creation. We're just going to name it Media 1, or I'm sorry, Media 2. So that way we have a duplicate guy there. And then we'll store him on the G drive, of course. Remember, do not store your virtual machines on your system drive. We'll tell it next. We'll just leave the memory at 512. That should be fine for us to do our little clustering experiment. We'll apply and create the connection. Remember, this connection was created during way back during the first video when we created our Hyper-V machine to begin with. We'll tell it next. And now we'll create a virtual hard disk here, and we'll just leave the defaults as they are. We'll tell it next. Install an operating system later. Install an operating system for boots DVD-ROM. Nope. We don't even want to install it from a floppy disk. We want to install it from a network-based installation server, which is, of course, our WDS. We'll tell it next. And we'll tell it to finish. And we'll go ahead and we'll boot this guy up, and we will begin the process of using the install image that we just captured from Media 1. And I am showing you this technique twice in the series because I want you to make sure that you know how to do it, because it's going to be very handy for you to create images of machines. And by the way, this works with Vista and client machines just as well. Oops, looks like we got a boot failure there. Let's try and let's hit the reset button and we'll go again. But especially if you're creating a base image, a reference image to use for a whole lot of machines, especially client machines, this technique can be very handy. Oops, looks like I wasn't fast enough on the draw there. So if you've always been dreaming of using Ghost or Altiris or some other image-based type of installation scenario for a whole lot of clients, this might be a really good solution for you without having to buy extra software, because it's already built right into Server 2008. Alright, let's see, are we loading here? Yep, okay, we're loading just fine. Now while this guy is loading up, let's go to the File menu and to Settings. I know I've shown you this before, but I wanted to go in here again. I need you to pay attention to the fact that this is an IDE controller. Okay, and this is the hard drive that I have installed. If I go back to the IDE controller, I could add additional hard drives if I so desire. I can also go up here to add hardware. Now notice that this is grayed out. I can't install any brand new hardware while this machine is actually turned on. I'd actually have to turn the machine off in order to add any of these things. You will notice here that there is a SCSI controller available though. So it may be possible for later experimentation actually install a SCSI controller and a hard drive on this particular virtual machine to see if clustering works better with that. Now, I had some trouble though booting up with the SCSI controller and the hard drive, so this may or may not be in future updates that may be a little more functional, but for the time being, booting up on the SCSI controller was not functional during my first initial tests of this. So when you get a chance, you should probably click through and just take a quick look at the various functionalities of each of the components of the settings for the Hyper-V machines. They're very handy, and you may get questions about them on the test. Alright, so we're just going to go ahead and cancel this out because we really can't make any changes anyway. And we'll go back to our machine here. Let's tab down and hit Next for Windows Deployment Services, and this is just a regular old Windows deployment scenario. pretty much identical to the same thing that we did with our TS server when we created a duplicate of it. All right, here's our Media Services EXP image that we just created, and we'll go ahead and we'll tell it next. We'll go ahead and specify that the only disk that's attached we will install there, and scroll up here, and now installation is going to continue automatically. We really should say auto-magically. There's really not much we need to do until it finishes its installation, and then we'll need to name the machine and join it to the domain so we can play with all the nifty toys that provides. So once again, we're going to pause the video, and then I'll be right back. Alright, so Media 2 has finally finished installation here. Let's go ahead and go through the quickie installation process here. We're going to skip the activation key. Don't forget that you do get a trial period. Next, accept the license terms. We'll click on next, and now we'll name this guy Media 2. Now notice here that I'm actually able to click, and the reason for that is that the integration services that we installed on Media 1 have come along over with the image on Media 2, so we don't have to reinstall those. I'm sure you probably remember that from the last time that we did this. But that is the advantage of creating a reference computer. Remember that all of the stuff that you do to your reference computer comes right along in the image because it's been installed as part of that volume that you installed your operating system on. And there we go. We're going ahead through the regular process. Let's go ahead and let's do a quick resize here so we can get to the Control-Alt-Delete button. Now remember that whenever you install a duplicate machine, it is no longer joined to the domain as we saw in the last time we did this. So when you log in, you're going to have to log in with the local administrator password that you set up on your reference computer. So I'm using the same administrator password that I did with Media 1. Now one quick note is if you've installed or saved stuff to other volumes on your disk, that stuff may not have come over. If you're working with a multi-volume setup on a particular machine, you may have to copy stuff over from that separate drive or that separate volume. Always double check to make sure that everything came on over okay. Alright, we're still in workgroup mode here, so we do need to rejoin the domain. We do need to set the time zone. Let's go ahead and let's just do the quick configuration stuff that we always do when we set up a brand new server. Nothing really surprising here. We'll do a quick static IP address for this machine. And we'll go into properties, and of course we're running on an IP version 4 network, so let's turn off IP version 6, and we will go ahead and we'll specify an address here. 192.168.5. See, I think the Media 1 was 18, so we'll do 19 for this one. And we'll leave the default gateway as it is. It remembered that. And we'll specify our domain controller as our primary DNS server, and we'll tell it OK. All kid stuff, right? Nothing, no big surprises here in this pattern of events. Let's go ahead and go back on over to the ICT, and let's see what we ended up with here. Our roles, streaming media services and web server, came on over OK and all of the necessary features. So we'll click on close, and that will bring us to Server Manager. It'll open up auto-magically, and there we go. Okay, so Media 2 is up and living, but we do need to join it to the domain real quick. Let's go ahead and let's get that done. We'll just join this guy to globalmantics.com. And I'm going to go ahead and use SuperCoach here for my administrative credentials. And of course, we're going to have to do a restart on this machine. But rather than pause the recording, let's go ahead and minimize Media 2. Another advantage to working with Hyper-V machines. Let's go back on over to Media 1 instead this time. Oh, before I get into that here real quick, you'll notice here that TS1 and TS2 are off. And the reason why I turned those two off here is that every time I add a new virtual machine, I start chewing up the RAM quite a bit here. So in order to have Media 2, I wanted to make sure I had plenty of RAM so it wouldn't go like a turtle walking through molasses in January. All right. Looks like my screen's kind of jumping around here. Thank you to the resolution. Another nifty thing about your virtual machines in Hyper-V is you can turn them on and off as you need to. Let's go back on over to Media 1. And what we're going to do on this newly restored copy of Media 1, remember that we did restore from the snapshot. Let's go ahead and bring this guy up. There we go. Let's go ahead and let's install our failover cluster feature on this particular machine here while Media 2 is rebooting. And after we install on Media 1, we will bounce on over and we will install it also on Media 2. So we'll go ahead and go into features here. And we do have some features already installed, but we need to go into add features. Remember that failover clustering is not a server role, okay? It is a feature, a smaller item than a role. A role is a big job, and a feature is, think of it as a smaller gig, right? All right, so failover clustering, and then the server might need to be restarted. Okay, well, that's fine. And you know what? I guarantee the server will need to be restarted because otherwise it gets really angry with you if you don't. Okay. All right, let's go back on over to Media 2 and let's see how that guy's doing. And it looks like Media 2 has restarted, so let's go ahead and click on the Control-Alt-Delete button for Media 2. And now we're going to log in as an administrator for the network rather than the local administrator. So that way we have all the power need be. Alright, so the initial task configuration is going to pop up again. Let's not show this window at logon because we've already gone through our ICT work for Media 2. And let's bring up our server manager and we'll get clustering installed on this guy as well. We'll go into our features here and we will add our feature. We'll put a check mark here in failover clustering. And we'll tell it next and install. All right, let's bounce on over to Media 1 now. Let's see how that guy's doing. Looks like they're installing still. So tell you what, I am going to go ahead and pause the video now while these features install and I get the machines rebooted. So as soon as these things finish out, I'll be right back and then we'll move into our clustering implementation. We're back over here on Media 1. You see in the feature section that failover clustering has successfully been installed. Let's bounce on over to Media 2 here real quick. And we'll notice here that failover cluster is also available here. All right, let's go ahead and go back to Media 1. And now let the experiment begin. Let's go to the Start menu. And we're going to go find the failover clustering management tool here underneath Administrative Tools. Let's go into Failover Cluster Management. And once this MMC pops up, what we're going to be doing is we need to first validate to see if the cluster that we're intending to make will actually work. Now, Microsoft has built a nifty little checkup wizard to see if it will actually work before we try to create the cluster. So we're going to go over here to the actions, or we could do it from here as well. I mean, there's a couple different links. Let's click on Validate a Configuration, and let's see if our cluster has any kind of chance at all to actually work. We're going to go ahead and tell it next. And now we need to tell it what servers we're going to be using. So we're going to put in here Media 1, and we'll click on Add, see if it'll find it okay. Yep, there we go. And then we'll do Media 2. And both of them are recognized. Fantastic. We'll tell it next. And now server's going to run a whole bunch of tests, including inventory, network, storage tests, system configs. If you know everything else works, you only want to run particular tests, you can actually select Run Only Tests I Select, and it will allow you to select the stuff that you want to check for. Now, since this is an initial configuration, and I'm not really sure if this is going to work at all, we're going to go ahead and run all the tests to see what we come up with. And there we go. Here are all of the tests that it's going to run, which are, well, all of them. And we're going to tell it next. And now it's going to sit here and spin for a while it checks through to see if there's actually hardware that's actually going to play nice. We're going to check to see if we have storage drives that we can actually utilize for this. It's going to validate the IP configuration for both machines. And any errors that it comes up with, it's actually going to provide us with a nice nifty little HTML page. We'll actually be able to go in and see what things are completely broken. It doesn't take real long for this to happen. Oh, hey, there we go. We've got a big bad red in here. It's the color coding is about what you would expect. If it is red, that's bad. If it is yellow, that's kind of a warning, and if it's blue, it's all good. So let's go ahead and click here on View Report. Although you can see the initial report items in here. Let's click on View Report. Let's see them in a nice, nifty, clickable HTML format that we can jump around on a little bit. And there we go. Okay, so now we have some warnings in here on our potential cluster disks. If we click on this, no disks were found to perform cluster validation. The disks are clustered currently online in the cluster. The disks are unsuitable for clustering. Well, yeah, we know that because earlier, remember I was telling you that all I have in my machine are actually IDE and SATA drives, and so we're going to have some problems with the storage. Now this validate IP configuration, this is a biggie that has failed, and it just goes through and we can check to see which ones actually did completely blow up. There we go. Found duplicate IP address 192.168.18 on node media 1. And media 2. Well, let's go ahead and go over to media 2 then. And it looks like we may have had some kind of blip in the configuration for that. Let's go into media 2. We'll go into the server manager here. And, multiple IP addresses. Well, that didn't seem to work nearly as well as we'd hoped. So let's go in here and let's see if we have any IP addresses hiding out under the advanced section. We'll click on IP version 4 here and go into its properties. Not what we want. I was pretty sure we set that to 19, didn't we? Let's go ahead and set that guy to 19. Let's go into the advanced section and let's go ahead and remove one of these guys. Tell it okay. All right, so now we have .19 as our IP address. And oh, looky here. Looks like I didn't pay attention to this network error. Windows has detected an IP address conflict. Okay, something weird happened during the reboot or something. But I think we should have it fixed now. So let's go back on over to Media 1. Let's close this web page, and testing is completed, but one or more tests indicate that the configuration is not suitable for clustering. Well, we tried to fix the IP address item. Do we have any other big bad failures? I don't think so. I think we got the one big bad failure. Let's go ahead and let's click on finish. And now that we fixed the IP address configuration issue, let's go ahead and let's try our wizard one more time. So we'll do media 1, media 2. Notice how fast that guy finds it. All right, tell it next, run all tests. Next, and away it goes again. And let's see how we do this time around. And again, it doesn't take very long at all. Looks like we got a lot of stuff happening. Well, looks like we got some SCSI issues there, and we got some warnings over here, and well, looks like we got all kinds of stuff we should probably go back and look at. Testing has completed successfully. The configuration appears to be suitable for clustering, but you should review the report, which contains warnings that you might need to respond to. All right, well, if we kind of scroll down here through the quick look here, we got some network communication issues. We've got some clustering disks. Now, I knew going into this we were going to have some storage issues due to the fact that we're running IDE and SATA drives in here. So these are not a big surprise to me. But you know what? I think we're going to see if we can go ahead and create the cluster anyway, despite the fact that we have those warnings. Now, obviously, in an ideal environment, you're going to have hardware that already has SCSI already ready to go. You're going to have hardware that's already passed Microsoft's hardware specifications. But again, I want to make sure you know what this looks like and how to get it done once you do have the appropriate hardware. So we're going to create a cluster here. And you notice how many wizards we keep seeing in this thing? Yeah, it's pretty wizardized. All right, we're going to go ahead and tell it next. And now we're going to put in our servers that we want to cluster, Media 1 and Media 2, and we'll see how they do. We'll tell it next. And now we get to name the cluster. Let's call our cluster Media CL. And now we need to put in an address for our cluster. And so we're going to do 195.168.5.20. Now I want to make sure that you know that this is actually going to be the DNS name of the cluster. Now this cluster is going to respond to requests, if it actually does work, using the name that you create. So for our media services, instead of going to mms://media1.globomantics.com/prac, if our cluster would work, we would go to mms://mediacl.globomantics.com/prac. Okay? So what we're really doing is we're giving our cluster a DNS name per se. Go ahead and we'll tell it next. It's going to double check to make sure everything is going to play nice. Okay, you're ready to create a cluster. The wizard will create your cluster with the following settings. All right, and we'll go ahead and we'll tell it next. It's going to take just a little bit to configure the clustering here. And it's probably going to take long enough that I should probably pause the recording. So as soon as this guy is done clustering, I'll be right back. All right, so the cluster has been successfully created, or at least it seems like it has. Let's scroll through here and let's see what we got. No appropriate disk could be found for the quorum disk. The cluster has an even number of nodes. Consider changing to the node and disk majority quorum configuration to improve cluster availability. Okay, well, no appropriate disk has been found for the quorum disk due to the fact that we don't have any SCSI. Okay, and you got to have SCSI for clustering to really work properly. Let's go ahead and click on Finish, and there we go. Let's go ahead and let's see what the cluster creation end result looks like here. Now then, you'll notice here that in our little icon, you see the little exclamation mark here, and also on this one as well. Node majority. Warning, failure of a node will cause the cluster to what is that? I think that's probably a fail. Let's roll over it here. Yeah, there we go. Warning, failure of a node will cause the cluster to fail. Check the status of the nodes. All right, so we do have a problem. Let's see if we can attempt to get something figured out about it here. And along the way, I want to kind of take you through a little bit of a tour. Now, in the services and applications section, you'll notice that we do not have any services or applications running for the cluster. So we really haven't done or accomplished anything until we actually add a service or an application to the cluster. Now, if we go into nodes, we have Media 1 and Media 2. It's telling us that they're both up. All right, well, that's good. Let's take a look here in the storage. Well, this is not so good. Okay, no disks available, no disks in use. Not a big surprise there. All right, here is our networks, and we have the cluster number 1. It is up, so that's not too bad. All right, let's see if we can do something about this little exclamation mark and about this node majority thing. Let's go into the quorum settings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click here on Media CL, which is the name of our cluster. And we'll go into its properties, and let's see what we can find out. In the General tab, you see we have a Media CL. Here's the name. In the Resources type, here are the different resources that we could add into the mix here. File share quorum. If we're using file share, and that's not really what we're doing. Cluster permissions. Okay, nothing specific in there. All right, so let's try another one. Let's right-click on Media CL. Let's go into More Actions this time. And we'll go to Configure Cluster Quorum Settings. So let's just kind of talk through this. This wizard guides you through configuration of the quorum. The quorum configuration determines the point at which too many failures of certain cluster elements will stop the cluster from running. We talked about that a little earlier. The relevant cluster elements are the node, and in some quorum configurations, the witness disk, which contains a copy of the cluster configuration or witness file share. A majority of these elements must remain online in communication, or the cluster loses quorum and must stop running. Just like you have to have a quorum of people to run a meeting. For example, if you have a board of directors meeting, your quorum might be 75% in order to actually have the meeting. Well, the same thing happens here with clustering. If you have a 2-server cluster, one of your servers must be alive in order to actually continue to run. Now, the quorum disk, has to live on a server somewhere, obviously. But again, we don't really have any disks that are set up to handle it because we don't have any SCSI disks. Okay, so note that the full function of a cluster depends not just on quorum, but on the capacity of each node to support the services and applications that fail over to that node. For example, a cluster that has 5 nodes could still have quorum after 2 nodes fail, but each remaining cluster node would continue serving clients only if it had enough capacity to support the services and applications that failed over to it. All right, so let's go ahead and let's take a look here. Let's go to next. Here are the quorum modes, all right? Now we have node majority, which is the default, but it tells us that it's not recommended for your current number of nodes. Okay, it can sustain the failure of 0 nodes. All right, so we have nothing really. we might as well have a single server if we're going to leave our quorum configuration set up here. Node and disk majority. Now this can sustain failures of 1 node with the witness disk online. Can sustain failures of 0 nodes if the witness disk goes offline or fails. All right, well, this is going to be the one that we should select, by the way. Node and disk majority is primarily for use if you have an even number of servers. Now, here's the thing. Whichever server has the witness disk on it, which of course we don't have any disks that are favorable to that, but if we did have a SCSI drive on one of the 2 machines, then we should be able to have node and disk majority. Now we also have node and file share majority. This is not something we're going to use. We don't have any special configuration here. And no majority can sustain failures of all nodes except for 1. Cannot sustain a failure of the quorum disk. This configuration is not recommended because the disk is a single point of failure. All right, so in this instance, we're going to select node and disk majority for an even number of servers. For an odd number of servers, we could use either nodes majority and node and file share majority. So we could use one of these 2. You're probably going to use node and file share majority for things like SQL Server and Exchange Server. All right, let's go ahead and tell it next. And no quorum witness has been configured for the cluster. This is at the point where our experiment kind of hits a point of failure because we don't have any disks that are available for allocation. So that's not so great. Okay, so we're going to click on cancel, and again it's due to the fact we don't have any SCSIs, right? Okay, but even so, I still want to show you how to configure a service. Even though we can't get our full cluster up, I still can walk you through this. We're going to go ahead and we're going to configure a service using this nifty little high availability wizard. We'll tell it next. Now, I told you earlier that for the most part, clustering was originally designed for storage area networks. However, that doesn't mean that's the only thing that it can do. Now, normally we would be using file server, but we can also run generic applications, generic scripts, generic services. Oh, hey, this is the one that I think we could probably utilize with our media server had our hardware configuration worked properly. But we also have things like message queuing, print servers, virtual machines, Win servers. But again, at this point, I just want to let you know that just because you see the ability to attempt to do it doesn't mean that it will necessarily cluster a particular service or role. So if you get really frustrated, clustering may not necessarily be the best way to go. You may have to instead utilize network load balancing instead. So in our scenario, what we're really trying to do if we had SCSIs is we would actually be trying to create a highly available media server. That's really what the end goal of what we're attempting to accomplish here. All right, this is not working. Let's cancel that. Let's try this one more time. And we just won't select message queuing. Let's go to generic service. And don't forget that Microsoft Help actually has some pretty good stuff in here for generic services, but we're going to go ahead and go into our select service item here, and we're going to select the service that we want to try to use with clustering to provide a highly available service for our users. And that's one thing to keep in mind as you look at clustering. What you're really trying to do is you're trying to give your users a better experience. You're trying to create something that they can get to whenever they need it. All right, so I'm still scrolling down here. Looks like we got a whole lot of stuff that we could utilize. But what we're really looking for here is our media server services, right? And here it is. Windows Media Services enables streaming digital media across networks. We're going to tell it next. And now we get to add another name for the service that we're going to be using. So what we could do is we can call this service Globo TV. And again, what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to create another DNS record, so when users go to globotv.globomantics.com, they're actually going to be going to the service on this machine. So in this instance, I know earlier I had told you that you would actually go to mms.mediacl. Well, now that we're adding the service, that we're now changing the game. What we're really doing is we're saying you need to go to Globo TV because that is what we're naming this instance of our cluster. All right, so we're going to tell it next. It's going to sit here and validate the settings real quick. Oh, look, no storage. Yeah, that's not so great. But we knew that was coming, right? We'll tell it next. Now, programs and services may store data in the registry. Therefore, it is important to have this data available on the node on which they are running. Specify the registry keys under HKey local machine that should be replicated to all nodes in the cluster. Well, since we created a duplicate machine, this is not something we'll need to worry about. We'll tell it next. And now we're ready to configure our high availability here for this media services or WM server generic service, quote unquote. We'll tell it next. So now it's going to sit here and spin for a while, and we'll see if we can actually get it semi-fixed here. Okay, looks like high availability was successfully configured for the service or application. We could view the report here real quick to see what it actually did and see if there's any useful information in it. It looks like it's just going to tell us what it actually did. Anything that we can click on, nothing we can really click on. Okay. And so we'll click on Finish. All right, so we now have 2 nodes in our cluster. We have our service configured. So if we jump over here to Services, all right, here is the server and the services that we're utilizing. The owner of this service right now is currently Media 2. So in theory, if our Globo TV actually did work, then we would actually be accessing resources on Media 2. But again, since we don't have disks hardware available for quorum configuration, our cluster may or may not really play nice. So tell you what, we're going to try one more thing. It appears as though it does work, kind of, with the exception of the fact that we have nothing over here in the storage section. We're going to bounce on over to the Vista machine, and let's see if we can actually access our PRAC point that we created for our media server. So let's go ahead and let's jump over here. Let's see if this will actually work. MMS:// let's try it all caps here just in case. globotv.globomantics.com. Oops, we got the slashes going the wrong way there. Got to make sure our slashes are going the right way. /prac. And let's see how we did. Let's see if we get anything at all. Well, it did seem to open up to that. Can it? No, cannot find the file. Okay, so this is where we're going to actually stop our experiment because I knew going in that this probably wouldn't work due to the fact that we have too many hardware issues with that. So really, what I would really need to do in order to make this work is to have hardware that would be SCSI, iSCSI, Fiber Channel, etc., etc. But at this point in time, you now should know at the very least how to set up a cluster, how to add a service, and you also know that if you don't have a quorum disk, if you don't have SCSI hardware, or at least SCSI hardware, or iSCSI, or any of the other supported hardware types for your disks for clustering, it's not going to play nice. But at the very least, we were able to complete the experiment, walk you through the steps, so you know that when you do have the hardware, you know how to make this happen. Okay, friends, the experiment was a semi-success, so we'll count that. Let's go back to the slides and let's wrap up this video. All right, so let's go through the words here, our critical vocabulary real quick. Windows Media Services is a downloadable role for Server 2008 that allows streaming video and audio over a network. Publishing point is a defined location that allows for single files, playlists of files, web pages, and live broadcasts. Remember that we are using IIS in the mix here, as well as RTSP, Real-Time Streaming Protocol, and we can also use HTTP, but we're going to get better results with RTSP. And RTSP is Real-Time Streaming Protocol. It's obviously a protocol optimized for streaming media. That's as much as you really need to wrap your head around for that, at least at this time. WMV, I know. I just thought I'd throw it in there because you already know what this is. But a failover cluster is a feature that allows for multiple servers to be clustered together for fault tolerance. And a quorum disk is a SCSI hard drive. Okay, let's go ahead and let's kind of mark this here. SCSI hard drive that allows for clustering to occur and provides storage for replicated files between cluster servers as well as other information that supports clustering. We also call this a witness disk, and without the quorum disk, your cluster will not work, as we discovered, right? Alright, so after reviewing this video, you should be able to download and install Windows Media Services in Server 2008, create an on-demand publishing point for a single file to be streamed, also be able to instruct users on how to use IE, Internet Explorer, and the MMS:// prefix to access available media. You should be able to install the failover clustering feature in Server 2008, run a validated cluster wizard. You should be able to create a cluster and identify scenarios when using the different quorum disk configurations. Remember that node majority, as much as that is the default, you're probably going to need at least 3 servers in your cluster for node majority. If you have an even number of servers, you're going to use node and disk majority, okay? So keep that in mind as you go into working with this stuff, and you might even see that discussed somehow on the exam as well. Because knowing how to configure a quorum is, as you've discovered, really critical to the implementation of that cluster itself. All right, friends. Thanks for going along with me on our little experimentation journey for that. Hopefully you learned a lot of good stuff in this video. And so in the next video, we're going to start talking about the certification process so you can take all this wonderful information, go in, sit down, take a test for it, and pass with flying colors. I'll see you in the next video.